So, you know that feeling, right? When you've had a diagnostic test, maybe a swab, some blood work,
Hmm.
and then you just wait and wait, and your mind starts going a little bit.
Yeah, what are the results? Is everything okay? What does it all actually mean?
Exactly. And, behind the scenes in the lab, people are looking at this data, trying to figure it out.
And it turns out, even for tests we think of as pretty standard, like PCR,
Yeah.
well, interpreting those results can be surprisingly tricky.
Really? How so?
Well, it takes really skilled eyes looking for subtle patterns, and sometimes, honestly, it's just hard to be perfectly consistent every single time.
Okay. And for ages, we've heard about AI stepping into healthcare, right?
Yeah.
Promising faster, better diagnoses.
We have. But often that AI felt a bit like a black box.
Right. Data goes in, and answer comes out.
But why that answer? The AI couldn't really tell you.
And that lack of transparency, that's been a major roadblock, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
I mean, labs need to trust the results. Doctors need to be able to explain
And the
things.
regulators.
And the regulators, definitely. They demand accountability.
Yeah.
You can't just rely on a critical diagnostic tool if you can't see how it reached its conclusion.
Yeah.
You need that receipt.
But here's the thing, that black box problem, it's starting to change, to crack open.
Mhm.
In this deep dive today, it's really centered around a key moment when that shift properly kicked off. We're talking May 29th, 2025.
Right. And our source material for digging into this is an article called Transparent AI Transforms PCR Diagnostics. It really documents this pivotal breakthrough that happened right on that date.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear then. We're going to unpack what exactly happened with this tech,
Mhm.
why it's such a big deal for, well, everyone involved, labs, doctors, regulators.
Yeah, and ultimately for you when you're the one waiting for those test results.
Exactly. We want to show you how AI diagnostics is becoming transparent and what that really means for, trust and speed in healthcare.
And to really get why this breakthrough matters so much, we probably need to first understand the specific challenge it's tackling, which is the world of real-time PCR diagnostics.
Okay, PCR. Let's break this down a little. If you've ever seen the data output, you probably know those charts. The fluorescent curves rising up,
The amplification curves.
and the standard way to read those, often it involves setting a line, right? A cycle threshold or seat value.
That's the common method, yeah. If a curve crosses that line early enough, it's generally called positive. Seems simple.
Seems simple, yeah.
Maybe.
But is it?
Well, on the surface, maybe. But as the article we're looking at points out, there's actually a lot of complexity lurking beneath those curves.
Like what kind of complexity?
Oh, things like baseline drift, where the starting signal isn't flat, or sudden spikes of noise that kind of look like a real signal but aren't.
Ah!
Or sometimes you get these slow, linear creeps upwards that don't really mean anything. Or just curves with really odd shapes that make it hard to confidently say, yep, that's positive, or nope, that's negative.
And that's where the human interpretation becomes really critical, but also challenging.
Exactly. Traditional software often forces the analyst to focus heavily on that threshold line. They might adjust it manually or just rely on their experience to spot those weird shapes.
But every experienced tech knows intuitively that the shape of the curve tells a story, right? Not just when it happens to cross some arbitrary line.
Precisely. But the software often doesn't capture that nuance easily, and that leads to variability.
How so?
Well, different machines might produce slightly different curve shapes. Then you have different people interpreting the data, maybe across different shifts or even different labs.
Ah, you get inconsistencies.
You get inconsistencies. It creates this kind of statistical swamp, as the article puts it. And that can lead to errors. Borderline calls getting pushed one way or the other. Potential false positives, or maybe worse, false negatives.
Okay, and this is where AI was supposed to help, right? To see patterns in that swampy data.
That was the promise. AI could potentially spot those subtle patterns, drain the swamp, so to speak.
But then we hit the wall. The black box.
Exactly. The AI might say sample positive. But if the lab director asks why,
Crickets.
pretty much,
Yeah.
the AI couldn't show its work, couldn't provide that step-by-step reasoning. And without that clear receipt for the decision, well, it just wasn't practical or safe for critical diagnostics.
Which brings us right back to May 29th, 2025. Because that's when this really started to change.
That's the pivotal moment. Yeah.
So tell us about it. What happened?
Okay, so on that date, this UK company, Diagnostics.ai, they launched their PCR.AI platform.
PCR.AI. Got it.
And the big difference here wasn't just that it used AI. Lots of people were trying that. It was that this was the first platform certified under the new EU rules the CE-IVDR rules, specifically designed to crack open that black box.
Ah, the certification is key.
It is. It basically allows labs to see inside the algorithm's thinking process when it's interpreting those PCR curves.
So it's not just getting a peek inside, it's like the whole thing is laid out for inspection. What does transparent actually mean here? How does it show its reasoning?
Okay, this is where it gets really cool, I think. The AI doesn't just spit out a result. It gives you a detailed explanation.
Like footnotes.
Kind of, but integrated. The article gives this great example. Imagine you're looking at, B7 on a plate. The AI doesn't just say positive.
Yep.
It might explain something like, okay, I looked at B7's fluorescent slope, its inflection point, its noise profile, basically, the whole shape and behavior. And I compared that shape against, say, 1.2 million curves we have stored in the archive for this specific test.
Wow, 1.2 million.
Yeah, a huge historical data set. And it continues. 96% of the historical curves that most closely matched B7's shape were confirmed positives. The timing relative to the controls looks good. The controls themselves pass QC. My confidence is 98.7%.
That's incredibly specific.
And then it might even ask, do you want to see the actual IDs of the historical curves I matched it against? They're right here.
Whoa, okay, so it's not just a verdict, it's the entire case file, the chain of evidence right there.
Exactly that. This ability for the AI to basically have a conversation, to justify its conclusion. That's the core innovation.
And it arrived just in time. You mentioned regulations.
Precisely. It wasn't just a scientific curiosity. It was driven by regulatory necessity. Just 3 days before this launch, May 26, 2025, the European Union's big new regulation, the CE-IVDR, officially came into force.
Ah, the IVDR. Heard a lot about that. Big deal for diagnostics.
Huge deal. The in vitro diagnostic regulation, it's way tougher than the old rules. It demands much more rigorous proof, more traceability, continuous monitoring for diagnostic devices.
Especially for complex software that influences results, right?
Absolutely. The old way of saying, just trust my algorithm, it's fancy math, that just wasn't going to fly anymore under IVDR. Every single step in a software's decision-making process needs to be documented and justifiable.
So labs are suddenly facing this massive compliance headache. They needed systems that could basically document their own homework.
You got it. And Diagnostics.ai essentially built their system so that every analytical decision gets logged automatically, ready for an auditor's inspection.
Makes sense.
And the source notes, they weren't just aiming for the EU. They got MHRA registration in the UK, too, and were pretty public about being ready for FDA requirements over in the US.
So this platform is kind of like a tool for labs to handle that extra regulatory stuff, but also actually improve their workflow.
That's exactly the idea. Navigate the regulations and get better results.
Okay, so how does this transparent brain actually pull this off? You said it looks at dozens of features, compares against archives. What's happening sort of under the hood?
Right. It's built on what they call a model-aware architecture. Fancy term. But what it means is the system is designed from the start to remember why it made each decision.
Like a super detailed lab notebook for the AI itself.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
But automated and totally structured. And the analysis method, it moves way beyond just relying on that single seat value, that threshold crossing. Instead, it extracts dozens of different numerical features from each curve. Things describing its shape, its behavior over time, like how steep is the slope at its peak, how much noise or jitter is there in the signal, how does the baseline behave early on.
So it's treating the curve itself as this rich source of information, not just a line crossing a point.
Exactly. It's analyzing the entire signature of the reaction. The shape tells you more than just the height or the timing of crossing a threshold.
In fact.
In fact, the PCR.AI system actually ignores the cycle threshold completely for its main analysis.
Wow. Okay, so what does it do instead?
It takes that whole set of features, dozens per curve, and compares it against that massive archive we mentioned. Millions of historical curves gathered over like 15 years, all with known confirmed results.
And how does it decide then if a new curve is, okay, or if it's suspicious?
It uses a specific type of AI model, gradient-boosted trees. Now, the deep math isn't the crucial part for us. Right. The important bit is why they chose that model type. It turns out these models are much easier to make explainable compared to, say, a really complex deep neural network.
Okay. Explainable how?
You can actually follow the decision path the model took. It's like following branches on a decision tree. So when it looks at a new curve, it doesn't just give a final answer. If the curve looks odd or ambiguous based on its features and historical comparisons,
It flags it.
it flags it. And critically, it prints out the reasons why it's flagged, which specific features looked off, or which historical matches were maybe inconsistent, then it pauses.
Pauses for a human.
Yep, pauses for human review, but presents all the evidence right there. And a lab's quality manager, they can audit any decision right down to the specific data points the AI used.
And that neighbors idea you mentioned earlier, where does that fit in?
Ah, yes, the neighbors. That's a really key part of the explanation it provides. The system literally shows you, okay, based on all those shape features I extracted from your test curve, these are the historical curves from our archive that look the most similar, its closest neighbors.
And it knows the results for those neighbors.
Exactly. It shows you the known outcomes for those historical neighbors. So if your test curve looks almost identical to, say, 100 past curves that were all confirmed positives,
High confidence.
very high confidence, and the system can show you those matching curves as part of its reasoning, part of the audit trail.
But if the neighbors are a mix,
If the closest matches are a jumble of positives and negatives, or maybe look like known failures, then it gets flagged for that human double check with the neighbor's map right there as context.
that gives incredible context, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
like the AI is saying, look, based on everything we've ever seen, this curve looks exactly like these examples, and here's the proof.
It does. And that whole approach, analyzing the full shape, comparing against deep history, that's why it's so good at catching errors that older methods might miss.
Even errors that humans might miss.
Sometimes, yeah. Things like subtle baseline drift that doesn't quite look wrong at first glance, or maybe some noise late in the reaction that gets misread, or even internal controls that are slightly off but don't trigger a simple failure alert. The shape analysis often picks that up.
Okay, so technically sophisticated, checks the regulatory boxes, but what does this actually look like on the ground? In a busy lab, what's the real-world impact?
Yeah, the article paints a pretty vivid picture of the change. Think about the old way for running, say, a standard 96-well PCR plate.
Okay.
A tech loads it up. Then they spend quite a bit of time manually setting baselines, adjusting thresholds, trying to remember the specific settings for that particular test.
Sounds fiddly.
It can be. Then after the run, they might be printing out plots, literally circling weird-looking curves with a pen, manually overriding calls, flagging specific wells for a senior tech to come and look at. And audit prep. Forget about it. That means digging through binders of old printouts, trying to match up manual log entries.
Wow, that sounds incredibly time-consuming and, like you said, prone to variation between people.
Exactly. And the source actually puts a number on it. For that old manual workflow, they estimate about 55 minutes of active, hands-on technologist time per plate.
55 minutes. Okay, so what's the new workflow like with this transparent AI?
Much simpler. Tech loads the plate, hits start. The system does the full analysis automatically, usually in just a few minutes.
And the interpretation.
It flags only the genuinely ambiguous wells, typically a tiny fraction, that actually need human oversight. And crucially, when it flags them, it presents that full evidence trail and the explanation why it needs review.
So the senior tech isn't wading through everything.
Nope. They just review the flagged items, clicking through the AI's reasoning and audits. You just export the digital log, everything's there per test, evidence attached. Easy.
So from 55 minutes of hands-on time down to what?
The estimate is maybe around 10 minutes per plate.
Wow.
That-
That's a 45-minute difference
Oh, yeah.
per plate.
It's huge. The source mentions one lab calculated this saves them something like 160 hours of technologist time every year, just on this one type of analysis.
160 hours? That's almost a month of full-time work reclaimed.
Pretty much. Skilled work, too.
And that time saving, it's not just about making the lab more efficient, is it? It must have knock-on effects for patient care.
Oh, absolutely. That reclaimed time means labs can maybe run plates later in the day or process more samples overall. It shaves precious hours off the time it takes to get results back.
Right. Getting results faster for, say, someone with suspected pneumonia.
Exactly. Means the doctor can make the right treatment decision sooner, maybe reduce unnecessary isolation time or avoid using broad-spectrum antibiotics just in case while waiting. In infectious disease especially, speed is absolutely critical for containing outbreaks.
Faster is definitely a win. What about accuracy? Did the studies mentioned in the source back that up? Does it trade speed for accuracy?
Good question. But no, apparently not. The source cites a couple of NHS studies, big ones, covering over 23,000 results. They showed accuracy over 99.9% and 100% agreement concordance with expert manual review.
So, as good as the experts.
Well, here's the really interesting part. The AI didn't just match the human experts. In some cases, it actually spotted errors that the humans had missed during the original analysis.
Seriously, like what?
Things like where manual thresholds have been set maybe a bit too aggressively,
Yeah.
or quality control samples that had drifted slightly out of spec that hadn't been caught, or even subtle failures in internal control signals that weren't obvious.
Wow. So it's not just as good as the best human expert.
Mhm.
It's potentially better because it applies this deep, consistent analysis every single time, beyond what the eye or simpler software might catch.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. And a lot of that confidence comes from the sheer volume and quality of the data it learned from.
That 15 years of data.
Exactly. 15 years of anonymized, carefully versioned clinical data. Millions and millions of curves, all meticulously labeled by experts over time. This gives it an incredibly deep understanding of what's normal, what's variation, and helps it reliably spot those tricky edge cases.
And new labs can add their own data.
Yeah, they can train the system on their specific instruments or local quirks, but without losing that massive global perspective baked into the core model.
And the fact that the data is versioned and updates even show accuracy changes, that feeds right back into the whole transparency and accountability thing, right?
Absolutely. It gives confidence to the labs, to the regulators,
Yeah.
and as the source puts it, it kind of keeps the engineers honest about how the model is performing over time.
Okay, let's maybe zoom out a bit then. If we think about the different people involved in healthcare, what does this kind of transparent AI really mean for them? Let's start with the labs.
Okay, for labs, it's huge. You get guaranteed audit-proof logs, which is massive with regulations like IVDR. You get significant time savings, freeing up skilled staff, easier compliance, and honestly, probably helps lab managers sleep a bit better knowing the automated analysis is solid and fully documented.
Makes sense. What about for clinicians? The doctor's getting the results.
Potentially much easier conversations with patients. Instead of just saying the test was positive, they could, in theory, pull up that evidence trail.
Yeah. Show them the curve.
Yeah. Look, here's your curve, here's how the control ran, and see how the shape perfectly matches these million other confirmed positive examples. That's why we're confident. The source suggests that kind of data-backed explanation can really build trust and understanding way better than just citing a number.
Okay. And the regulators, we touched on this, but
For them, it's a whole new level of data-driven oversight. Instead of wading through paper trails, they could potentially query an API, trace the exact analytical path the AI took for any given sample. That allows for much deeper checks on robustness and consistency.
and for patients, for you and me.
Faster results, more accurate results, and results that are really, for the first time, truly explainable. The source uses this lovely phrase, empathy built on code.
I like that.
Yeah, you get your answer sooner, with higher confidence, and your doctor actually has the tools to show you why.
And what about the wider industry? The companies making the PCR machines or other lab software?
Well, it provides a clear path forward. Instrument makers can potentially embed this kind of transparent AI capability right into their machines, making them compliant out of the box. And other software companies can build maybe more user-friendly interfaces or data management tools on top of this reliable, auditable core engine. And it's probably worth pointing out, too, that Diagnostics.ai, according to the source, deliberately focused on routine PCR first.
Why is that significant?
Because that's the high-volume, daily grind testing that actually consumes huge amounts of technologists' time in most labs. It wasn't just about chasing the more, maybe, glamorous AI applications like analyzing complex histology slides or assisting tumor boards.
They went for the bottleneck.
Exactly. They tackled the area where automation and transparency could free up the most hours day in, day out. That's why the time savings are so dramatic.
Okay, so this is clearly a breakthrough for PCR. But this whole idea, transparent, explainable AI and diagnostics, it feels like it has legs beyond just this one test.
Oh, absolutely. This model-aware, explainable approach, it's not going to stop at qPCR.
Where else could it go?
Well, think about other molecular tests that generate complex data shapes or signals. Next-generation sequencing analysis, maybe liquid biopsy data, even protein assays. Anywhere you have a complex signal over time or across parameters, this idea of shape analysis and comparison against a deep history could apply.
And even beyond molecular diagnostics.
The source certainly suggests so. Broader areas like medical imaging radiology, pathology slides where AI is already making inroads, or genomics interpretation, even analyzing EKG traces for heart conditions. Anywhere you need reliable, auditable AI interpretation.
And the regulatory push is likely to continue driving this.
It seems that way. The FDA in the US, for instance, has its own plans for regulating AI and machine learning in medical devices. And the expectation is they'll emphasize similar things to the EU's IVDR, traceable reasoning, monitoring how the AI performs over time, post-market vigilance. Europe kind of set the benchmark here.
So the core message seems to be spreading. In these critical fields, you can't just ask an algorithm for an answer anymore.
No, you need to be able to demand to see how it got there.
The era of just blindly trusting the algorithm, especially in healthcare, it really feels like that's coming to an end.
I think that's fair to say, yeah.
So just to wrap up, this development we've been discussing, it's not just some, technical detail or a boring regulatory update.
No, not at all.
It's really about fundamentally changing how we approach and how we trust automated decisions within healthcare. It takes a process that was historically really complex, quite variable, heavily reliant on deep human expertise, and transforms it into something that can be faster, more reliable, and the key word here, fully explained.
Yeah. So think about the next time you, personally, are waiting for a diagnostic test result.
Okay.
The technology working away behind the scenes, it's evolving incredibly fast. And it's being driven now by this dual need for both speed and accuracy, yes, but also for transparency.
The goal being faster, more confident results for me.
And empowering your doctor to give you a much clearer picture of what those results actually mean and why they trust them.
The black box in diagnostics, it really is starting to open up.
It is.
Which kind of makes you wonder, though, what other areas of life, where algorithms are making important calls, maybe in finance or hiring decisions, even the recommendations you get online, what if those algorithms also had to show their work? What else might we be able to understand if transparency and explainable reasoning became the norm there too?
That's a great question to ponder. But for diagnostics, at least, the mystery threshold is gone.
And the curve, with a bit of help from transparent AI, can finally speak for itself.